Starting your very own design or renovation project can be and should be a very exciting one. However, for most of you, I'm sure it can also be quite a daunting experience. Some of the first questions that I'm sure pop to mind are, where do I begin? How do I start? And how do I make all of this fit together and flow smoothly? Well, that's exactly what I'm here to show you today as I show you 5 simple steps and tricks to getting your renovation started or your design project from beginning to end. Here are 5 design tips to getting you started. Tip number 1, start with a brief. When starting with any of my projects, I always start with a brief, and this is a crucial step. Why? A brief is essentially a document or a step-by-step guide that is going to take your project from start to finish. You are going to sit and list all the elements that you need in your project, a guide in essence, to getting your project from A to part B. Understanding what you're getting yourself into is of key importance, and a plan is the only way you're going to get through this project with as little stress and as most enjoyment as possible. In this step, it's important to list the goals and the directions you want for this project. Let's, for example, say that we are creating a new office space out of a second bedroom. It is very important that you consider how you plan to use that space, the function of the space, and the possible issues that you might see within that space. Right, so the big question, how do we do this? How do we incorporate this tip into our project? You are going to start by creating a list and a scope of works for your project. List all your must-haves versus your needs to have. Establish the need to have versus the want to have. This is also going to help you stay on track and stay on budget. Also a very important element which we're going to look at in a bit. Some of the points that you may want to consider when defining the scope of works are as follows. Firstly, what is the main function of my project? Why am I doing this project? Our next heading is you want to define the scope of works. Next, you want to consider any contractors. What am I actually doing with this project? Am I doing a revamp where I'm only looking at aesthetics, or am I bringing in contractors that are going to perform structural work elements? And a very important tip and heading, the budget. Is there a budget? What is my budget? What kind of financial elements do I have to work with? Right, the next element here, you want to be clear. Be clear on the steps that you will need to take to renovate or revamp your project before you start. Prioritize the most important elements first. And in our case, when it comes to me, I usually schedule or work around all the messy elements first. So all my wet works and structural elements, if I have any, I would start that first. So if we've got any structural or messy elements on our home office renovation, I would list those items first as a priority. My next point, and a very important one at that, research, research, research. Information is power after all, isn't it? So the more I research, the more I'm able to generate and get ideas of elements that I might not have considered, or ways to do things that I might not have thought of before. So research. An important tip I can leave you with here after this element is really think about what this project is going to be used for and try to accommodate for everything. The worst case scenario is that you finish off your project and you look back and you think, oops, I wish I'd added this, or I would love to have added this. So make sure you spend a lot of time in the planning section before you rush to the actual construction or physical work. Moving on to step number 2, tip number 2, create your floor plan. This is all about traffic flow and flow within spaces. Right, so following very closely behind creating your scope is your plan. Space planning and creating a plan is crucial for any design project. Now, space planning is going to make sure that the space that you're working with, the new space that you're designing, is cohesive and has a good traffic flow and flow within that space. Space planning is going to help you address elements such as furniture selection, furniture orientation, lighting placement, fixtures and brightness, as well as material choices. The how do we design for best traffic flow? Point number 1, you want to survey the existing space. Now, don't be daunted by this term. Survey simply means to take a tape measure and measure up your existing space. Now remember, take your time, use accurate measurements and dimensions. This can then be sketched on a simple piece of paper, Or alternatively, for those who are feeling daring, you can transfer this survey onto your Planner 5D app using real-time dimensions. Next, you want to sketch the proposed plan. So here we are going to take our survey, the plan that we've just drawn up, and create sketches for the proposed space. So what our space needs to look like. Again, you can do this by hand, or you can do this using the Planner 5D app, which obviously I recommend because you're getting a much better realistic model all at one moment. Another element that I want to introduce you to is the bubble diagram. So a bubble diagram is literally bubbling functions, literally taking circles and drawing them on your plan of functions that are going to take place in that space. Now here is one of my favorite tips that I'm going to be sharing with you. Take some masking tape or any form of tape and tape up the space. So what you want to do is grab some masking tape and physically go and put tape down of exactly what you're wanting to be doing in the space. So for example, if you're wanting to put a desk in a corner, you're going to take your masking tape, measure the size of the desk, and use the masking tape to give accurate dimensions of that desk in that space. It's very simple, but it is very effective. Right, so before we move on to the next tip, I really want to encourage you to go and check out the new feature that Planner 5D has just brought out specifically for iPhone. It's the new AR feature, which essentially allows you to create designs in real time. So it allows you to do a walkthrough of the space simply by holding your phone up to the area that you're wanting to see the design of, and it starts to design as you're moving. So I'm going to link a link to this in the comments below, and I really encourage you to go and check that out. Tip number 3, be specific when selecting your finishes. Bring on the creativity in your project. So this is a very exciting step, but a very important one too. We need to spend a lot of time planning and thinking about the finish selection within our space. Why? Because selecting the correct finishes is going to bring about a sense of cohesiveness to your space. Selecting the correct finishes is going to tell a story about the design that you're creating. It's going to take the viewer from a start point to a finish point. Very important question, how do we do this? How do we go about selecting the correct finishes? Firstly, you want to spend time thinking and researching. Take time to consider and compare what finishes are going to work in your space. Think about things like colder climates versus warmer climates, elements that I've got in my space already, and if I'm wanting to match that. Next, you also want to be visiting showrooms. Speak to suppliers and consultants and get their input as well. After all, that is their purpose. Next, and very importantly, you want to create a finishing list or a list of materials. Here, I generally create a digital sample board, starting with my floors and working my way up. Alternatively, you can also create a list of each item that you're wanting to include in your renovation project. Right, so next I'm going to give you some headings that I typically use on my projects when creating my digital sample board or my samples list. Firstly, I consider all the elements and materials around my flooring. I then look at skirting and electrical points. From here, I look at paint finishes and wall finishes. I then tend to look at my artworks and accessories. Following that by furniture and any custom joinery that I'm including in the space. I then look at samples for ceiling finishes, lighting, and electrical elements to do with my lighting. Right, so back to our home office renovation project. Here is an example of how I have created a sample board or a mood board for this specific project, showing some of the finishes that I'm wanting to use and showing how they work cohesively. Tip number 4, the importance of lighting and electrics. Did you know that a design or a space can be totally ruined by improper lighting or incorrect electrical placement? Now, a lot of you might leave this off your design list, but it is of high importance. Why? Improper lighting can make or break a design, and the same goes for electrics. When designing your layout, it is vital to match the lighting and electrical needs with the functions that need to be taking place within that space. Am I using a computer? Do I need a side lamp? Will I be working at night, etc.? And then design your lighting and electrical around that. How do I incorporate sufficient light and electrical into my design? Step number 1, cater for plug sockets. When it comes to electrical points, always count how many plug points you will need in relation to what equipment you will need in that space. So what equipment needs power, and then cater for that. From here, I then add a contingency of 1 or 2 points as well. So if I need 5 points, I add an extra one just to be safe. Next, you want to cater for light switches. Think about light switches that you're going to need in the space. So you're always going to need one, but think about what you want turned off and turned on at what points in the day. Maybe you need 2 points. Maybe you've got accent light and functional light going at the same time. Next, you want to capitalize on natural light. So avoid blocking off natural light coming from windows and rather consider making a feature if this is possible. So opening the space to allow more natural light into your space or your project. And lastly, add in light for function. Add enough light to be able to function correctly in that space. So you want a light over your desk. That's an artificial light source, which could come from a floor lamp, an overhead light, an accent light. Right, so here are some of the lights that I have chosen to use in my renovation project where I've converted my bedroom into my office space. As you can see, there are artificial lights. I do have a window, but I feel like I need some additional light. Tip number 5, don't forget to be budgeting. Right, so when it comes to designing your project, the budget section and the financial section can often be a massive deterrent. And that's exactly what we're trying to avoid. It doesn't have to be like this. That is why I suggest right from the beginning, we start creating a budget. Think about what are the financial hurdles or obstacles that are in my way and plan for them, plan it all out and stick to that budget. How do we go about reducing budget stress? Here are some of my key tips. Tip number 1, set up a budget plan. So this could be from a mini rough budget to a very detailed one, but it's always recommended to have an idea of what things are going to be costing you. So research also forms a part of this. My next tip, negotiate and look for specials and deals. So these days we have the luxury of choice and selection. So by shopping around, you can find deals. That is what is going to help you avoid breaking the bank and assist you in finding a product that has the best value for money and suits your project needs. My last tip for this section, allow for contingency. I always allow for a 10 to 15% contingency. When working on any design project or building or renovation, no matter the size, there's always something that is going to come in slightly out of budget or something that you might have forgotten. So to avoid this, I always add my 10 to 15% extra contingency fee at the end of my project on my mini project budget. Right, so here is my little sample budget that I've created for my home office renovation project. You're welcome to take note of some of the headings and use them in your very own project. And if you like, I've linked a planner or a template budget for you in our comment section below that you can use to create your project budgets. Right, and that's a wrap. There you have it, my budding designers. There are your 5 simple tips and tricks to starting and setting up your very own design project. I hope you enjoyed them as much as I did explaining and teaching them to you. Please leave any comments below of any elements that you would like me to elaborate on or create additional videos on, or even if they're just elements that you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe to our page if you haven't already done that. Like and share and go wild on social media. We love to hear from our viewers. With that being said, thanks again, and I so look forward to seeing you again next time. Good luck on your design journey.